All right, 131, folks. We're looking at Unit 4. We're looking at Chapter 7 at this particular point. Chapter 7 and 8 are relatively close with what's happening. I started to hint a little bit at what was going on when I was talking about the doc itself. I want you to think about the logical progression of presidents here, because we go from Washington, who does 8 years, we go to Adams, and then we go to Jefferson, and then we go to Madison, eventually to Monroe, but we don't get as far as Monroe. What you have to realize is that when it comes to presidents, Washington and Adams, along the same lines, Washington is going to create this national dynamic of what he feels the office of president should be. Adams is going to try to follow suit, but he doesn't have the prestige. I mean, he's a learned individual. He's got great ideas on a few things, but he doesn't have the dynamic personality. He doesn't have the following. He doesn't have the war record. He doesn't have the things that Washington does. And so although he's going to try to accomplish things, they're going to go, it's not going to go well. But the issue here is this, is that Adams is one of Washington's people. He's going to keep some of the same people in the government. He's going to keep that same dynamic, which is a balance between that federal and that Jeffersonian idea of what a republic is. It's not a real strong central authority, but it's not a real state central authority. Adams is going to maintain that same line, but when Jefferson steps in, Jefferson is going to go, okay, you know what, man, this government is not what the Constitution intended. It's not what the ideal of the Republican agenda is. Washington, as president, thought the president's office should be representative of the majesty of the country, and so when he went to work, he took a coach and six, which means he took a coach and 6 white horses, literally, that took him from where he was living to work each day and back, because he thought that represented the office and the stateliness of it. Jefferson is just going to hop on his horse and ride into work each day. All right, he doesn't think it needs to be stately. Jefferson is going to have a suit of clothing, what he calls this good Republican clothes that he wears, because he feels that we are just a nation of farmers, of what he calls yeoman farmers. And the idea of the perfect Republican ideal would be all these landowning farmers that have a say in what's going on and can create the government. The problem is that Jefferson's landowning farmers, his yeomen, are not landowning farmers. What he thinks is a yeoman is what we think of as a southern planter, a plantation owner, somebody who owns quite a bit of land, somebody who has some book learning, somebody who's got some education, and agrees with him. What he wants to do is he wants to create a more state-centered authority. So he's going to work to undo some of the stuff that Madison did, to undo some of the stuff that Washington did, and to roll back the federal power in such a way that he's going to cut back the Army funding. He's going to cut back on the National Bank. He's going to cut back on quite a few things to try to create some more state-centered control versus what's happening with the Federalists. This is important. This is important because what he does is he cuts back the national basis, and he cuts back the power of the office. And so we're not acting on as much of an international scale as what we were working towards with Washington itself. He feels like this is a more democratic form of things. The other thing that's going to come up is we're going to start establishing a judiciary. We're going to create the Judiciary Act of 1801, and the idea is to create some judgeships on a federal basis, to create a system of laws to better effectively legislate what's happening. What's going to happen is this, that Jefferson is going to be replaced, that when it is his turn to be voted out of office, he's going to set up a dynamic thanks to this Judiciary Act. What he's going to do is say, hey, listen, Madison's coming in, and Madison is a Federalist. Madison is a Federalist that wants to create more of a power structure. So what we need to do, since federal judges are lifetime positions. What he's going to do is create this new Judiciary Act that will allow him to go ahead and appoint a whole bunch of brand new judges that have his his anti-federalist leanings, and put them in office in such a way that it's going to guarantee that his policies carry on long after he's done. And so he's going to spend his last few minutes office, literally last few minutes, appointing these judges that agree with him. And they're what they call the midnight judges. And the midnight judges are important because what's going to happen is as soon as Madison walks in, he's going to say, hey, just hold all those letters. We're not going to send them out. Something else is going to happen here. And that's important because we've got to pick that up and talk a little bit more about it. But let's talk about one other thing before we do that. Jefferson was supposedly a strict constitutionalist. And part of his idea of a strict constitutionalist was if it's not written here, literally if it's not written in the Constitution, then we don't have the power to do it. Well, one of the things that comes up is there's going to be a war between Great Britain and France going on, and France is going to create these, French Empire, and they're going to be expanding, and they're going to run into some cost overruns. They're going to run into some issues with this whole French Revolution and a few other things going on at this particular point. They're going to need some money, and so they're going to offer to sell us territory. We were interested in a little place called New Orleans. We were interested because it controls access to the Mississippi. And once or twice along the way, France has cut off access, or Spain has cut off access to New Orleans and the Mississippi and shipping through the Gulf. And so we want to buy that. And so Jefferson's going to send out someone to negotiate, and France is going to turn around and say, you know what, we will just sell you all of this territory. We'll sell you not just the city, but we'll sell you this whole chunk. What we know as the Louisiana Purchase. Here's what happens. Jefferson is going to say, you know what, that's a great opportunity. It more than doubles what we have in the way of a nation. He's going to go ahead and okay to buy it and try to get it through Congress because it creates a treaty. The treaty has to be approved via the Senate. But the problem is nowhere is it written that the president can do this. And so Jefferson's going to have to go against his own ideals to use a federal power that's not guaranteed. This is a huge part of what's going on because how he interprets this to create this treaty of cession, this Louisiana Purchase, this purchasing of territory, is huge because we start to have an argument, and the argument is going to be implied powers. Implied powers. Remember that, folks, implied powers. Because implied powers is going to set the precedent for a lot of changes in how government is going to happen. What we get is we get this brand new territory, we get this ongoing argument, we get this appointment of these federal judges, and then we get a transition in power. And the transition of power is going to be when Madison comes in, and he's going to see this disarray, and he's going to put a hold on a lot of what's going on. Part of the problem with this is they see that France and Europe are fighting, and we're being drawn into this. We want to trade with both of them, but being drawn into that, we can't trade with either one simultaneously because they don't want us to trade with the other group. And so what's going to happen is we look at the beginnings of the setup of the War of 1812. And so what I wanted to do is talk about in the second half of this one is talk about the War of 1812 and the changes that makes. So I'm going to cut it off here.